Absolutely nothing beats windshield time, a road trip, and good conversation in the car. Welcome to another episode of Dan the Road Trip Guy, where we have entertaining conversations about cars and road trips, life lessons, and maybe every now and then a little advice. I'm your host, Dan Neal, road trip extraordinaire, and now buckle up and enjoy the show. I have been looking forward to my road trip conversation for several weeks. My guest is Angela Savage. She is the daughter of Swede Savage. Swede was a racer in the 60s and 70s. He was involved in a horrific crash at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway during the Indy 500 in 1973. He died later in the hospital from that crash. For Angela, she never had the opportunity to meet her dad, talk to her dad, be held by her dad, because at the time, her mom was expecting her. I hope you'll listen to the entire episode and learn how Angela overcame the trauma of losing her father, returning to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 2014, and the advice she offers for anyone dealing with trauma in their lives. Well, welcome to the show, Angela.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Dan. It's really an honor to be here today.
It's an honor for me also. I know we don't know each other personally, but hopefully after this little virtual road trip, we'll know each other a little bit more.
Right. That is one of the nice things about social media. Sometimes you don't know if you're actually connecting with people, but it really is a real place. And we really do make connections. And sometimes, we get to chit chat in real life. And sometimes we get to share our stories with people. And there's a lot of good things that can come out of social media.
We'll take about 2 minutes or so, 1 minute, whatever, and just introduce yourself to my listeners because they probably won't know who you are.
Yes, my name is Angela Savage. I am the daughter of a famous race car driving legend. His name was Swede Savage. He did all kinds of racing in the 60s and 70s. He started with quarter midgets and worked his way into motorcycles. He did some flat track racing and sort of the beginning of motocross. He raced at Ascot and the Springfield Mile and the Peoria TT and some other very famous motorcycle race tracks. Then he moved his way he did stock car racing. He did NASCAR racing. He raced a Ferrari. He did all kinds of wonderful things. And then he finally reached his goal is to get into IndyCar with the famous Dan Gurney. He was Dan Gurney's protege. He raced in the 1972 and the 1973 Indy 500. And I'm just extremely proud to be his daughter. And so I am carrying on his legacy for him. I have a beautiful family. I have a husband, Scott, and two beautiful children, two sons. My oldest son, Chance, he is a senior in high school. He's 17. And my younger son, Cruz, is in 6th grade. And they are just two really amazing boys. They're actually my very best friends.
Excellent.
And so I live here in Carmel, Indiana. I moved here to be closer to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which, as we know, if you're an IndyCar fan, is like Mecca to IndyCar fans.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm just about 20 minutes north of the track in Carmel, Indiana. I'm loving it out here in the Midwest. And, honestly, I moved here because I had two boys growing up and I really didn't want to raise them in Southern California. When I was in Southern California, it just seemed like you had to grow up so super fast. And I wanted kind of a more hometown vibe for my boys to be raised in. So that's one of the main reasons I moved here to the Midwest is to raise my kids here. And I'm really glad that I did. They're in the Carmel Clay school system, which is some of the best schools in the nation. They're doing very well and they're growing up nice and slow, just the way I like.
This is Dan, the road trip guy. I love to talk about cars and road trips, and we'll talk about some other things. But tell me about your first car.
So my very first car was a 1985 Honda Accord, 4-door. It was sparkly blue, and I loved it. And I actually have a funny story about this car. See, my father, when he was actually the last fatal accident to happen during the Indianapolis 500 in 1973. And Wally Dallenbach, who is a legend of a race car driver in his own right, he actually got the ride that my dad was in after my dad passed, which was driving for Pat Patrick and STP cars. And so he ended up in the 40 STP car after my dad, and he immediately won a race, like one of the first races he was in that car. He won, and because he's such a wonderful gentleman, I love the Dahlback family, all of them. He won, and he took some of his prize money and he put it in a little account for me.
Okay.
And so what happened was that money ended up buying me my very first car. I like to give Wally Dahlback credit for my very first car, which was a Honda Accord, and I used to throw all my friends in there and have way too much fun.
I saw a picture in the book of you and a lot of young ladies crammed in a car. I don't know if that was the Honda Accord or not, but
that is the car. That is the same car. And those are still my same best friends.
Very good.
Yeah.
Now, was that an automatic or a stick shift?
That was an automatic, but
Okay.
I went to a stick shift in my next car, and I've been driving a stick ever since, up until this day. I really want a manual. I like to drive the car. I don't want the car to drive me. I got to be able to do some donuts when I feel the need, and sometimes I feel the need to do some donuts. So you got to have a manual stick for that. So, yeah, I definitely prefer the stick.
Yeah, I'm sure your dad would be happy that you're driving a stick shift, not an automatic.
I think so, too. I definitely think that's true, for sure.
All right, so tell me about an epic road trip in your life.
Well, when I was in my 20s, I was blessed to go on a trip to Europe. It was just me and my backpack, hardly any money, a Euro pass, so I could go anywhere on the train. And in about a month and a half, I went to France, Italy, Spain, Germany, Switzerland, and Holland.
Wow.
All in a month and a half. And I didn't have much money, so I stayed in the youth hostels. And besides that, I traveled alone, so I just had to sort of make friends and sleep on couches. And I ended up in a few barns. I ended up in a few amazing flats. Like, I met a friend at Louvre in Paris, and he asked me if I would house sit his flat for him, and because he was leaving town. So I ended up in this beautiful flat, and I remember that there was a wonderful bathtub, and it had these shutter-like windows that opened up right to the Eiffel Tower. Was my view right outside of the window. And I remember thinking to myself, Angela, you must be pretty smart. I don't know how you ended up here, but you ended up here, and this is going to be a moment that I'll never forget. And I'll tell you what, I never forgot it. That trip was so amazing to me. Now, in Spain, I actually went to the San Fermin in Pamplona, Spain, which is the running of the Bulls Festival.
Sure.
I didn't have any plans to run with the Bulls, but as I was sitting there waiting for the gun to go off, I was on the side of the fence with the viewers and not the runners. And at that time, I had this overwhelming feeling and thought to myself that this was a pivotal moment in my life. I said, now, Angela, what kind of person are you going to be in this world? Are you going to be a viewer, or are you going to be a runner? And so at the very last minute, I hopped that fence, and the gun went off, and I ran with the Bulls.
Oh, my. Okay.
I did. I ran with the Bulls. The streets are very narrow, and the buildings go straight up, so there's no place to run or hide. And so they let the runners go, and then there's 12 bulls they set free behind you. And the bulls run faster than the humans. at some point, 12 humongous bulls are going to pass you, and you have to hope that you're not in their way. I remember everything went into slow motion. I could hear I could hear the hooves coming up close behind me on the cobblestone. At the very end of the run, we all go into this big like Coliseum type place. When the runners end up in this Coliseum type place, there are already fans filling the seats. So you go in there, and there was this huge roar of the people that were already there waiting for the runners to come in. And then they shut the doors behind you. And so the next phase of this ritual, really, the next part is the viewers just watch as the bulls kind of run around and chase the runners in this enclosed circle in this Coliseum type place. And so the brave thing to do is to grab like a newspaper and swat the bulls on the butt or whatever, kind of tease them, right, and that sort of thing. And the bulls are angry, so they're trying to just kind of get you, so you're really just kind of trapped in this little trap with all these bulls. I remember that same day there was a hot air balloon race, and just as at the finish of this running, I looked up, and there were these beautiful hot air balloons going up over the Coliseum. And at that moment, I fell to my knees, and I thanked God. I just thanked God for keeping me safe. I grabbed one of the newspapers that people were using to swat the bulls with, and I took some of that sand and I wrapped it up in a newspaper, and I stuck it in my back pocket. And so what I ended up doing when I got home, I wrote a story about this whole running with the bulls thing. And I bought these little tiny jars, and I filled them up with the sand from the arena. I wrote the story in kind of a scroll manner. Remember in the 70s and 80s when you used to write stories and then burn the edges of the paper so it looked kind of cool? Yeah, did that, and then I rolled it up like a scroll, and I tied it with a red ribbon and the little jar with the sand in it. The story was about what kind of person are you going to be in this lifetime? Are you going to be an observer of life, or are you going to run the race? And I handed those out to some of my very favorite people.
Oh, very nice. Wow. Cool story. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a pivotal moment. I'll never forget that.
Hey, I'll switch gears with you a little bit. For those who don't know, Angela's mom was pregnant with her in 1973 when her dad, as she said, was fatally killed in the Indianapolis 500. You made a return trip to the Speedway in 2014. And I really want to just hear about your first impressions when you went back, why it took you so long, and just a little bit on that, if you would.
Right. Well, what happened was I joined Facebook in 2009, and people started to figure out who I was, started to ask me, would you ever come back to the Indy 500? Have you been back to the Indy 500? At first, my reaction was, hell no.
Yeah.
Why would I want to go back there? That place ruined my life. So I was really guarded and never had any plan to go back to the race or anything like that. In fact, it was all blocked out of my mind. I hadn't even considered it. But a really good friend of mine named Paul Powell and a few other people started this kind of movement thing and called it Let's Get Angela Savage to the Indy 500 in 2014. So a bunch of my dad's fans put money in the pot, and then IMS joined in. Doug Bowles, God bless him, is president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He picked up on it too, and helped out with plane tickets and, suite tickets, hotels and stuff. So lo and behold, I was coming back to the Indianapolis 500 in 2014. My husband and I came, and I even extended the invitation out to my dad's brother, Bruce Savage, who ended up coming as well. It was really a life-changing moment for me. I had no idea how big this race was and what IMS was like, and how much energy is in that place on race day, especially. And I didn't know that people really knew my dad, like they did. I certainly didn't know that they knew who I was. I had always heard that the racing community is a family. Growing up, I was like, yeah, whatever. I was just bitter a little bit because I
Sure.
kind of, for obvious reasons, but I was able to find out firsthand that the racing community really is a family, and they never do forget. And so I was welcomed with open arms and a lot of love. It was really a pivotal moment in my life. I got to take a ride around the track. I had them stop at turn 4 because I just wanted to have a minute there.
Sure.
And I wanted to get out. And I remember they were like, they're like, do you want us to come with you? Can we come with you? And I'm like, no, I just wanted to be alone there at turn 4 for a minute. They dropped me off at turn 4 and they took off there. And so I had my moment with turn 4 and yelled at the wall. And I actually spit on that wall, and I kicked the wall, and then, sorry. And then
That's okay.
I forgave the wall. I got all my anger out in that moment, and then I forgave the wall for everything, and it was really sort of like I had been carrying around this backpack full of bricks my entire life of just sadness and trauma that didn't end with the crash. It really just seemed to be the beginning of a lot of traumatic events in my life. And it was at that moment when it was like I just dropped off my backpack full of bricks right there at turn 4. I've been lighter and happier and a more healed and healthy person ever since then.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that probably wasn't easy, but I just really kind of wanted to hear it from you after reading through the book. And I told you I reread that passage last night on you stopping in turn 4. And I think I even got a little emotional just reading it and thinking about probably what you went through.
Yeah, it was, I'm sure you can tell I got a little teary right now, but they're healthy tears.
Yeah.
It's a healing cry. It's not a cry out of dread and sadness and sorrow. It's a cry because I know that moment changed me, probably on a molecular level, and really started my journey to healing and changing the trajectory of my life, which really hadn't been good up until then.
You were talking about that in your life before, and I told you I kept reading the book and I kept going to the next chapter. And I'm like, okay, this has got to get better here soon for this lady. And can you talk about a turning point in your life, that point where things just changed? And we know when you went to 2014, you did some things with the speedway, but it seemed like prior to that, you
That's right.
had some moments.
Like I said, my father's crash, it really started a long chain of trauma in my life. And, we learned actually while we were writing this book that when a woman is that pregnant and experiences a traumatic event like that, not only does she end up with PTSD, but the baby gets PTSD too. And it really can affect the development of the child in the womb. So I was literally born with a broken heart, and things just got worse. I struggled so much as a child, just with depression, and started drinking and using drugs at a very young age, 12 years old, 11 years old, too young. I remember by the time as I was getting older and living in Laguna Beach, I was struggling so bad with addiction and alcoholism. And I had this moment where I was just like fed up with everything. I couldn't stand myself. I couldn't stand my life. I couldn't stand life in general. And I remember crying out to God, just crying out to God, God, just give me a chance. Please give me a chance. And it wasn't within the next couple of days I found out that I was with child. I have to say that finding out I was going to have a baby was really the turning point in my life where I realized, okay, I'm going to be a mom. I'm going to give this child a good, happy life. There's no way I can be who I am now and be a good mom. So it was at that time that I had to move out of Laguna Beach because I just had a lot of friends around me that were enabling a lot of my very bad behavior. So I had to get out of Dodge. And my mom had already moved to Las Vegas because my stepbrother Shane lived in Las Vegas. So I jumped in the car and moved to Las Vegas with my now husband. We weren't married at the time. In fact, when we didn't hardly know each other really when we found out we were going to have a baby. So I told God, I said, I'm going to move to Las Vegas and I'm going to have this baby. I said, you can come with me if you want. If you don't want to, that's cool. That's fine. I won't bother you, but I'm going to have this baby. So Scott dropped everything and came with me to Las Vegas. And I ended up naming my son Chance because I realized that he was the chance that I was begging God for. I named him Chance. His middle name is Savage. He is my angel baby. He was the reason I finally, pulled up my bootstraps and got myself clean. Scotty and I didn't have any help at all. We rehabbed each other. He was in just as bad a shape as I was when we left Laguna Beach. We were both very much alcoholic and very much addicted to drugs. We took off, we left town, and we rehabbed each other. And we've both been clean and sober for a long time now. We're still together. We have another beautiful son, Cruz. But I have to say that was really the pivotal time in my life when I learned that I was going to have a baby, and I wanted my child to have a better life than I was having. So that was when I was able to put all the substances down and alcohol too, and we became healthy so that we could have healthy kids. Wow. Now we do. We're still together. Scotty's not only my husband, but he's my best friend. It's really just myself and him and our two boys here in Indiana. So we're really tight knit. We're all best friends and everything turned out okay. But I named him Chance because I prayed to God for a chance and he's what I got.
God has a way of delivering, right?
Amen to that.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. You talked about running with the bulls. So my next question to you was going to be, what's on your bucket list? I guess you can check that off. And so what's on your bucket list that you want to do before you die?
I do. There is something I want to do. I should say on that trip when I was in Switzerland, I bungee jumped, and it was the second highest bungee jump in the whole world at that time.
Okay.
Because I'm a savage and I like to be different and live on the edge. I was the only one that, most people just kind of jump out off the platform. We were in a gondola actually, but I had them put the ropes around my ankles and I did a back dive out of the gondola. It was like 700-800 feet up or something.
Okay.
It was right next to this huge waterfall, and there's this village down below us. That was magic too. So I really have done a lot of cool things. But one thing on my bucket list that I really want to do is I love horses. I love horses. I also love dolphins. Adore the dolphins, and I also love the ocean. So I have it in my heart to go somewhere where I can actually ride a horse on the beach and in the water and have some dolphins around.
Okay.
And I've seen that. I know there are places like that. Australia is the one that I'm thinking of in my head now, but definitely on my bucket list would be to ride a horse on the beach and be able to get in the water and be on the back of a horse in the water and have dolphins swimming around me. That's
All right.
something I really want to experience.
I hope you pull that off.
Oh, I'll pull it off.
Yeah, I'm sure you will.
Yeah.
One of my favorite questions I just love to ask people: if you could take a road trip with anyone, living or deceased, who would it be? What would you drive? What would you talk about? Where would you go?
Well, I bet you can probably guess who I'm going to say.
I think I told you that in my first conversation with you. I'm like, well, I pretty much know the answer to this, but
yeah, if I could go on a road trip with anyone, living or deceased, it would definitely be my father, Swede Savage. We would be driving in his very famous race car, the 1970 42 Plymouth Barracuda.
Okay.
That he raced and was sponsored by Hot Wheels. We would definitely drive to all the race tracks that are around and maybe aren't still around, but we would go to the racetracks. I would love to go to the Poconos with him because he always loved the Poconos and was planning on moving there, buying a house there. So I would love to just take a road trip with Swede Savage in that 42 Barracuda and drive to all the racetracks and have him tell me all of the stories and what he did there. And we would drive through the Poconos and just keep on driving into the sunset, into eternity.
Yeah, I kind of figured that was the answer, and I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
I know you never met your dad, but you've certainly met a lot of people who knew him. Tell me something special about him that maybe the public doesn't know.
One thing that I will say, my dad could do anything. He literally was just one of those people that could do anything. But there were a couple things that he couldn't do, and it drove him nuts.
Okay.
He couldn't fly a kite. And that drove him nuts. And also, he couldn't ride a unicycle.
Okay.
He could never master the unicycle, and that drove him nuts.
Master of a motorcycle, but he couldn't master that one wheel, right?
Couldn't master the one wheel, right. But one thing I want to say that maybe people don't know is that my dad was a gentleman. One time I was just at Lens Crafters getting some glasses, and oftentimes when I'm here in Indiana and people figure out who I am, their eyes go, huh? And I'm like, you have a story for me, don't you? And so the lady that was fitting me for my glasses says, boy, do I have a story for you. And there was this place, there was this hotel where all the racers, all the drivers used to hang out, get drinks and whatever, tell stories, shoot the shit. Pardon my language.
Yeah, it's okay.
This woman that was fitting me for my glasses was a cocktail waitress there. And she told me that, the drivers were, they would like to kind of smack her on the butt, when she's walking by. And they were really flirtatious and maybe a little inappropriate. They try and lift up her skirt. They were always messing with her.
Yeah.
And one time she was waiting on my dad, and somebody smacked her on the butt. And he stood up and he got in that person's face and he said, if I ever see you treat a woman like that again in front of me, we're going to go outside. I take a lot of pride in the fact that my father was a gentleman.
Yep.
He, if he saw someone mistreating a woman around him, he would not stand for it, and he would put up some dukes if he had to. And it wasn't just women. He was very protective of a lot of people. I hear a lot of stories where, somebody's about to get in a fight. My dad's motorcycle gang would pull up and grab the guy and put him on the back of the bike, and they rode off, and the guy didn't get beat up because my dad pulled up in his motorcycle gang and saved him. So he was always kind of team underdog, and he was always the first one to make sure there wasn't any funny business going on.
Yeah.
And I just think that's something that's really cool about my dad. I also like with the fans, I can't tell you how many people say, "Oh my gosh, I was just a little boy."
Yep.
And I asked him for his autograph. And not only did he give me his autograph, but he took me back to the garage and, let me sit in the car, or he let me, help him, he would always really engage the fans, especially the kids. Sometimes would spend an hour with them. I've heard this so many times. He spent, maybe it wasn't an hour, maybe it seemed like an hour to the kid, but he would always go out of his way to make them feel very special. And I still have a lot of people that come to me and want to tell me that today.
Thanks for sharing that. My coworker will be happy to hear that. We're coming to the end of our virtual road trip here, but I do want to ask you, because as I told you, as I read the book, I'm like, okay, her life's got to get better here soon. So you've obviously had some trauma. If you could just leave a piece of advice for people listening on dealing with trauma, what would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them that you can't put on a brave face, and you can't hide behind a mask, and you can't try and bury your trauma, because it will always come back out in some way. So if you've got trauma in your life, you must stop running from it. You must turn around and face your trauma. You have to face that dragon or that fire or whatever you want to call it. But trying to pretend like it didn't happen, sucking it up, buttercup, and keeping your chin up, or being stoic and pretending like it doesn't hurt you, that does not work. You must deal with it. You must stop and turn around and face that dragon. Otherwise, it will come out in awful ways. And besides that, there's this thing called epigenetics, and your body has memory. Your DNA has memory. And if you have trauma in your life and you don't deal with it, that can be passed down as memory to your kids. So unless you're willing to do the work, do the shadow work, and face your trauma and work it out, it will just continue. It can continue down through generations to your kids, to your grandkids, and their kids. And you have to be brave, and it takes a lot of work, but you can't run from it. You can't pretend like it didn't happen. You have to stop, turn around, and face that dragon.
Thank you for that, Angela. That's great.
You bet.
I love to give my guests the opportunity to share to my listeners how to find them, how to find a business, a charity. We've talked about the book. Tell people how to find this book, because I'm going to encourage everyone to get a copy, because it is just worth the read. Whether you're a race fan or not, it's just worth the read. Right.
Well, I like to say that this is Savage Angel is so much more than a racing book. While it does cover my dad's career, which is quite extensive, we really take a deep dive into what happens to a family after a traumatic event like that. Be prepared for a deep dive, but all of the things that are in that book, were really things I thought I would take to the grave with me, but it became too heavy to carry, too much of a burden to carry, and it was literally making me sick. I like to prepare people in advance for that, because it does have a lot to do with dealing with trauma and healing some addictions and afflictions. So you can find Savage Angel at savage42.com. And there's also some really nice merchandise and Swede Savage merchandise there. So definitely come to savage42.com. Just me, I self-published, so I see the orders, and I know exactly who's buying them, and I really appreciate the support. So come on over, and Christmas is coming too, so it might make a really nice gift, not only for your race fan friends and family, but maybe for some people that are going through some tough times and just need some encouragement and need to know that it doesn't matter how deep you are in the pit of hell, you can still climb your way out if you're willing to do the work. and if you're willing to face some of the things that you've been through.
Thanks for sharing that. Angela, I can't thank you enough for coming along on this little virtual road trip today.
This has been such a nice ride, Dan. I appreciate you for stopping by and picking me up so we can go on this virtual road trip. It's really been an honor to be on your show. Thank you for reaching out, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Until we meet up again, you can find me on the internet at dantheroadtripguy.com. I hope you will follow this podcast so that you don't miss any upcoming episodes, and share it with your family and friends so that they can enjoy the stories of my guests also. Until we meet again on a future episode, keep having conversations with each other and keep driving.